The second jhana, which contains 1. Heaven of lesser light, 2. Heaven of infinite light, 3. Heaven of supreme light. The third jhana, which contains 1. Heaven of lesser purity, 2. Heaven of infinite purity, 3. Heaven of universal purity. The fourth jhana, which contains 1. Cloudless heaven, 2. Merit-producing heaven, 3. Heaven of greater fruits, 4. Heaven free of trouble, 5. Heaven without affliction, 6. Heaven of excellent viewing, 7. Heaven of excellent observation, 8. Highest heaven. In the world of non-form, Arupiyadhatu, there are 4 heavenly realms: abode of boundless space, abode of boundless consciousness, abode of nothingness, abode of neither thought nor non-thought. The sufferings of the gods in the world of desire, Kamadhatu, are of 3 types. 1. The suffering of dying and falling into lower realms. 2. The suffering of anxiety. 3. The suffering of being cut, gashed, killed, and banished. 1. The suffering of dying and falling into lower realms. No matter what sensual pleasures the gods in Kamadhatu experience, they will also die when the karma which brought them into their realms is exhausted. It is said that the suffering of dying in the realm of the gods is greater than in any other realm. Why is that? To die in the realm of hells or pretas means to be released from those spheres of extreme pain and a chance to be reborn in higher places. But who would really like to abandon the most beautiful realm filled with intoxicating pleasure and happiness, where one has a perfect body and everything that his heart desires? Bodhisattva Nagarjuna said, quote, "Know that even Brahma himself, after achieving happiness free from attachment, in his turn will endure ceaseless suffering as fuel for the fires of the hell of ultimate torment." End quote. Quote, "Although the deities have great pleasure in heaven, the suffering of dying there is even greater than that. The wise who understand this cease to create attachments for the perishable heavens." End quote. Before dying, the gods experience the trauma of the 5 signs of death, as Nagarjuna described in the same text. Quote, "Their bodies turn an unattractive color, their cushions become uncomfortable, their flower garlands wilt, and their clothing smells. An unaccustomed sweat breaks out over their bodies. The 5 signs that signal the deities in heaven foretelling their death and departure therefrom are similar to the signs that foretell death for humans on earth." End quote. Even if the signs that foretell the death of gods may not seem extraordinary at first reading, please bear in mind that until those signs appear, their bodies were always fresh and healthy for many thousands of years, never smelt bad, never produced sweat, etc. So it's one thing to be human and have the above problems all the time, and quite another to live happily like a god for many thousands of years, in which only 1 minute of their life may be 100 years of human life, and suddenly experience the 5 signs of death. And it is said in some texts that the time before dying, in which the gods experience the 5 signs and contemplate their falling into the lower realms, also lasts many years. During this time, all the other gods leave them completely alone, being disgusted with the sight of their decay, and so the dying deity suffers enormously. Master Genshin described the sufferings experienced by the gods from the world of desire, Kamadhatu, when they approached death, and gave us the example of those inhabiting the Triyasrimasa, heaven of the 33 gods. Quote, "Even though the pleasures of these beings are boundless, when life comes to an end, they cannot escape the pain of the 5 decays. The first is the fading of the crown of flowers. Second, the heavenly weather clothing becomes soiled. Third, sweat flows from the body. Fourth, the eyes often grow dizzy. Fifth, the place of living no longer gives enjoyment. These are called the 5 decays. When we meet with these sufferings, we are disliked and cast off by the family of heavenly maidens. It is pitiful to roll around among the bushes and trees, weeping and grieving. At such a time the victim cries out, saying, I was loved constantly by all the heavenly maidens, and why is it that now they love me no longer? They have flung me away like grass, and do not care for me in the least. Now there is nothing on which I can rely. Who is there to save me? Leaving the palace castle of Zenkin, my life here must come to an end. There is no hope of seeing Taishaiku on his treasure throne. It is difficult to behold the glory of Shushadin, and doubtful whether I can ever ride on the treasure elephant of Shakuten. I shall never again gaze on the flowers of Shushawan. Never again shall I sit at the saki feast of Zoronin, nor play and linger in Quan Kien. Sitting on the smooth stone of the white jewel under the goba tree is a pleasure no longer possible. I can think no longer about bathing in the waters of Shushoshi. I shall never again eat the 4 sweets, and I alone am denied hearing the 5 glorious kinds of music. How sad that I alone must meet this fate. Oh, have mercy on me and save my life. But for a moment longer, I pray, grant me this pleasure, and let me not fall down on Mount Meru or into Bashur Sea. But though I utter these prayers for help, there is no one to save me. End quote. Bodhisattva Nagarjuna also said about the falling of the gods, quote, they must take leave of the divine worlds if their merit has run out. Then, powerless, they will become animals, hungry ghosts, or denizens of hell. End quote. 2. The suffering of anxiety. Depending on the merits they accumulated in previous lives, the gods in the world of desire receive various pleasures and desirable objects. Thus some have more than others, which causes those with lesser merits to become anxious and suffer. 3. The suffering of being cut, gashed, killed, and banished because of the wars they fight with Asuras or demigods. They're often hurt in many ways. However, whenever they're injured, their body parts regenerate with the exception of the head, as gods in the world of desire can be killed only by cutting their heads. Some weaker gods are often banished from their places by the more powerful ones. Bodhisattva Vasubandhu also described other kinds of suffering related with deities. Quote, deities who indulge in sensual pleasures are not happy in mind, they are burned by an inner fire, sparked by the infection of sensual desire. How can there be happiness for those whose minds are distracted? Since their minds are not under control and undistracted even for a moment, they are by nature disturbed and agitated. They will never be calm, like a fire that is wood for fuel, and that rages whipped by the wind. End quote. He also said, quote, they are like invalids, not long recovered from an illness, who eat improperly and get sick again. Quote, end quote. The gods in the world of form, Rupa Dhatu, and the world of non-form, Arupa Dhatu, do not experience the sufferings of the deities in the world of desire, Kama Dhatu, but they also die while still having subtle obscurations and afflictions. As I said previously, they have not freed themselves from the belief and attachments to the false ego, so the root of negative emotions is still there, even if they kept them hidden by being immersed in meditative absorption. Thus, not being liberated from samsara, they have no control over the course of their future karma, and when the reservoir of merits that brought them in those high celestial abodes is exhausted, they fall again into lower realms. Bodhisattva Vasubandhu said, quote, those in the form or formless realms are beyond the suffering of pain and the suffering of change. By nature, they have the bliss of meditative concentration. They remain motionless for an eon. But even this is most assuredly not liberation. After they've counted on it, they will fall again. Though it may seem as though they have transcended the turbulence of the miserable realms, yet, like birds soaring in the sky, they cannot stay forever, though they try. Like an arrow shot with the strength of a child, they will fall back down in the end. Just as butter lamps that burn for a long time are in fact perishing in every moment. They're afflicted by the changes of the suffering of conditionality. End quote. Namo Amida Buddha.